Good evening, everyone, and once again, thank you so much for joining me for our time together this evening. Uh, I am your host, Charles Logan, for the Thursday evening, 6 o'clock look into the Holy Book Devotional. And tonight, I just want to give a special welcome to all those out there who are now caregivers, especially Pat, who is giving care to my brother. So you are all God's gift to caregiving. I just wanted you to know that. So to begin with this evening, being a caregiver is a person who has a natural gift of encouragement. That person's been endowed with a very special spiritual gift. When there's a cloud of doom over everything, there's a person who shines through that dark cloud with a smile or a kind word to share or just a gentle touch on the shoulder, silently saying that there's someone near to share your discouragement. And for those who are especially gifted by the Holy Spirit, the ability to lift one's spirits comes naturally. But what about those of us who find ourselves in a situation that perhaps requires comforting someone else, and it's not a natural gift? Perhaps you are somewhat of an introvert, or just uncomfortable talking to people that you don't know. Well, on April 15th of 1912, the survivors of the Titanic disaster were gathered on the deck of the rescue ship Carpathia. They were being served hot coffee and blankets, and there was a pale of doom and grief as most of the survivors had lost their husbands or loved ones just a few hours before that. Now, huddled against the bitter cold as they were, one could only hear muffled weeping or no sounds at all, just stunned silence. There was among them a widow, and sadly, history has forgotten her name. But she was one of the unsung heroines of the aftermath of that tragedy. Putting her own grief behind her, she went from widow to widow and offered a smile, a gentle touch, and a few words of encouragement. When asked by one of the grieving widows if she did not realize that these women had just lost husbands and sons, she responded in a soft voice that she had also lost a husband. Now, the account is true, but we'll never know how that gesture may have touched those broken hearts on that ship, but the encounter was significant enough to make it into the history books. At times, darkness, sadness, grief, or just plain depression. There's nothing like someone who can get through that pale of darkness and offer a word that does so much to dispel some of those dark clouds. If nothing more than our encouragement to reassure someone that there are those who care for them, who care for their loneliness, and care for their discouragement. And one of the criteria for being a good encourager is that they must have a good attitude. Sounds simple enough, doesn't it? But what about getting up in the morning, knowing that the day will be full of unpleasant challenges? You may snap at the first person who says good morning to you, responding with what's good about it. Well, you've already infected someone else with an unhealthy attitude. But it also works the other way around. Say you got up And it's that other person who grumbles at you is spreading that dark cloud of unpleasantness, and your attitude of understanding and compassion mixed with perhaps a little humor should whisk away any clouds or unpleasantness in a moment. Certainly you want to explore the other's feelings, but it's hard to maintain a bad attitude in the face of compassion and sincere understanding. I think I shared with you at one time that I was a certified lighter than aircraft pilot. I'm still licensed, but to be recertified, I'd have to get certification from the FAA to fly with passengers now. But back in the 70s and 80s, the sport was fairly new, and people were fascinated with it, like they were in the early days of fixed-wing aircraft. Now, I was fortunate enough to know personally many of the early pilots who made names for themselves by extending the boundaries of lighter-than-air flight. People like Maxie Anderson and Ben Abruzzo and Sid Cutter. Most of them are gone now, having pushed physical barriers far beyond their limits. Now, one of our favorite sayings back then was that your attitude determines your altitude. Now, the sport was in its infancy, and too many times pilots did not heed that saying, and as a result, those primitive flying machines rebelled against them. Overconfidence, troubled circumstances, and mostly a bad attitude were to blame. Now, it all comes down to attitude. A good attitude is infectious. But not only that, it determines the outcome of your day and can play a very important part in someone else's day. To be an encourager, one must have a healthy attitude. All of those other attributes like patience and understanding and empathy and humility and a heartfelt desire to care are all part of being that encourager. When I think about being a comfort to someone, I'm drawn to Proverbs 17:22, which says, "A joyful heart is good medicine. A crushed spirit dries up the bones." Now, once again, when talking about attitude, and not just attitude, but a good, worthy, and helpful attitude. Now, you probably can give many examples of the effects of a bad attitude. They cause family disagreements and problems at work and even disputes between longtime friends. Just as a good attitude is infectious, a bad attitude can also spread. On rare occasions, they can be fatal. I don't know if you remember, but I remember these kind of things that happened. Back in 1992 at Fairchild Air Base in Washington, there was a well-publicized and very dramatically illustrated B-52 crash that occurred on takeoff. Now, the incident happened when Lieutenant Colonel Arthur Holland maneuvered the aircraft beyond its operational limits and lost control in a left bank and crashed on the runway. The crash claimed the lives of Lieutenant Holland and 3 other crew members with him. The official report also stated that contributing factors included Holland's personality and his behavior, which can be narrowed down to attitude. In fact, the Air Force now uses the accident as a training exercise in not allowing a person's attitude or actions to overcome another's input regardless of personality or rank. Now, when I look back on my flight training, I remember my instructor always said that it was absolutely necessary to be in the right attitude before taking control of a hot air balloon. As for me, I want to be an encourager. I feel strongly that God has prepared me all of my life to be a comfort to someone who's going through a very difficult time. As I look back on my working life, I can see how God was allowing me to experience things that necessitated a kind and a compassionate attitude. When in the insurance business, I had to contact families that had just lost a loved one in an accident. There were also many times that I had to deal with angry and adversarial situations where attitude was necessary to diffuse a potentially explosive situation. And when I worked for Pima County as a public fiduciary, that gave me experience in going through homes in search of important paperwork, which gave me a perspective into lives. Lives that on the outside were nondescript, but in reality had a rich and fascinating story. I saw my mother through her disablement due to a debilitating stroke that eventually claimed her life. I was caregiver to my wife Alicia during her time of suffering with cancer, and it was 6 years that I still look back on as a cherished time with her, and a special time that God allowed me to gain experience and compassion for others. I believe that God has called me to this ministry, even this late in my lifetime, and I will always be grateful for the opportunity if one presents itself. Well, now I'm faced with another God-given opportunity to serve as an encourager and a comforter to another that I dearly love. And we together have decided that no matter where this road leads us, I know that it will be God's will, and we will submit to it. Now, here are some things that I have learned along the way and about being an encourager and a caregiver, if you wish. First of all, I try very hard not to let pessimism drive my thoughts. When doing God's will, many times our wants and his desires for us go in different directions. The worst thing that one can do is to let that pessimistic thought grow until it contributes to a bad attitude. A bad attitude will prohibit one from being a comforter to anyone. Now, when I get down, and it's inevitable that that would happen, because we can't be up all the time, I'm comforted by Paul's words in Philippians 4, verses 8 and 9, where he says, "Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, and whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent and praiseworthy, think about such things." Verse 9, "Whatever you have learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put into practice, and the God of peace will be with you." Now, first of all, Paul is telling us to think about whatever is true. Now, that is to think about things as they are and not how we want them to be or imagine them to be. Imagination gone wild is the perfect recipe for something, attitudes gone wild. He also encourages us to think about things that are noble, thoughts that are good and respectable. And what about things that are right, as opposed to things that, because of the emotional state that we may be in, we intentionally, or maybe sometimes unintentionally, just make wrong? Paul also exhorts us to think pure thoughts. What is amazing is that if you remove all those distractions, like animosity and doubt and anger, there's really no room for anything else than good and pure thoughts. With with lovely and admirable thoughts, we can do no less than have a positive outlook and a positive attitude. You know, it's a great way to start a day. And more than that, we will not be influenced by someone who else is jaded in their outlook of life. You know, Paul also says to think about things that are excellent and praiseworthy, which speaks directly to our spiritual maturity. Now, whether you find yourself as a caregiver or an encourager or a comforter, we have a choice every day. Every day that we get out of bed, we decide to live a day with a positive attitude. Even if you step out of bed right into that kitty throw-up, you intentionally decide that the influences of the world will not interfere with your attitude. Excuse me. Now, it goes without saying that a healthy attitude is a Christian attitude. It is one that we want to concentrate on every day because we want to live a Christ-like life. And you know something? Jesus knew something about life, and he also knew everything about us. That is why during his ministry here, he talked about life and not so much about religion, and instead more about simple faith. He spoke about how we should live and act. He talked about how we should treat our children and how we should get along with our neighbors. He came to show us how to live a life of abundance. Now, here are some other things that we can take from having a good attitude. And number one, as I said before, it's infectious. A good, upbeat attitude causes others to look at things more positively. And number two, a healthy attitude is really healthy. It can lengthen one's life. And number three, a good attitude will, and this of course might be my favorite one, a good attitude will make men more handsome and women more attractive. And number four, a good attitude makes one more intelligent. One is more open to innovation and convention and the new things that are out there. And number five, a good attitude will make you rich. Now, I know we're going to get a whole lot of new viewers on this one. But a good attitude will make you rich. Sorry, not materially, but in the many friends who see you as an example of encouragement. You know, we will we will find ourselves at one time or another with someone who's struggling with life's challenges. You know, as we encourage them, it's a wonderful opportunity to share that positive attitude that is filled with faith and optimism. You know, I'll be the first one to admit that a positive attitude is not all our making, nor is it rooted in our own strength, but in the reassurance that God is in control and his strength is adequate to meet any of our needs, to face any challenge, and to ultimately overcome any crisis. Now, before I conclude our time together this evening, I just want to thank all of you who shared such heart-moving comments uh, from my last devotional. It humbled me, and I just can't tell you how much I appreciate that. But thank you once again for joining me for this time that we share together, and I hope it is beneficial in some way. As you might have noticed, these devotionals, I have a theme of caregiving since my life circumstances have changed. But like I say, you might be where I am someday. Once again, I'm Charles Logan, your host, wishing you a very happy and prosperous new year, and Lord willing, until we can get together again next Thursday. May God bless each and every one of you. Good night.